again, draft fact sheet. So we have a draft fact sheet. We've talked about it before for the PFAS compounds. It's up on the website. The most important thing from this, two important things. One, we're looking for comments by March 3rd, so about a month or so. And the second important thing is that they should go to Rose Knox, at rosemary.knox at state.ma.us. And she will be back here at what we expect would be the March Advisory Committee meeting to talk about the comments received and to finalize the document. And she's promised that she's going to do that. Right, Rose? So I think what you'll see here is similar to what we tried to do with 1,4-dioxane in different compounds that aren't necessarily part of the routine analyses when you send your samples off to labs. So there are certain situations that would be more likely to have these compounds, and thus we wanted to highlight those and try to describe them when you should stop and think, oh, in addition to whatever else you're looking for at this particular site, we should be asking for PFAS analyses as well. There are analytical issues unique to these compounds, so reading up on it here, there are somewhat limited number of labs that are out there doing this, especially equipment or kits that have to be added onto the existing equipment that labs may or may not have. I think certainly as we begin looking more and more at these compounds, more laboratories will have equipment. Our laboratory at the Wall Experiment Station is, I think, finalizing it, set up, and we'll be able to run samples for DEP in the very near future if they aren't already started.
Is that just water samples? It's very different to do different matrices.
I'm sure that that they are doing water first. The EPA lab in Chelmsford is also set up, and they're doing samples for the New England states. So they have limited capability, but they're working with us as well. And the reason I say that I'm sure they're looking at water first is that with PFAS, similar to 1,4-dioxane, that has been the kind of thing driving our concern about this. These compounds were included in the UCMR3 public water supply sampling program. There are a number of public water supplies in Massachusetts where these were reported. 2 wells, they were reported above the new EPA health advisory. So that triggered a number of actions. We're also seeing sampling done across the country, but including Massachusetts, at military bases where a triple foam may have been used. And we're starting to see some results from that sampling as well. And all of this is focused on the groundwater, and particularly groundwater that is either a source of public or private wells. It's certainly started with the public wells, and our drinking water program is doing a lot of work reaching out and working with the public water supplies that are known to be effective. There will be further outreach to public water supplies that may be where there's a greater risk of being impacted because they have wells that are near facilities that may have used these materials. So we're very part of what our lab capacity and EPA's lab capacity may be directed to is looking at samples from the smaller public water supplies that weren't in UCMR3, so they have not yet been sampled for these compounds, and try to prioritize them, identify the ones that are at least located near these potential sources, and begin looking to see if there are issues there. Waste site cleanup's role in that would be similar. I think we would be focused not on, obviously, if our sites impacted a public water supply, large or small, we would be dealing with that, and we are dealing with that. But we also are more directly involved in the private water supplies, and where these potential sources are near private water supplies, we want to look at that as well. So part of the point of putting out the guidance is to raise everybody's awareness that if you are working at facilities that may have used these materials, and there's a wide range of them, and you're working on sites that are nearby, you should be aware that this might be a contaminant of concern, you might have to do special analyses, take care to look at these as well. So take a look at the draft guidance and give us comments, and we'll talk about it again in March. Yes?
Hi, I'll just say that the LSPA's March member meeting on March 14th is going to host Tom Cambieri from the Cape Cod Commission to talk about their experience down there with their sampling and their remediation of the issues that they've been dealing with.
So what day was that?
March 14th.
March
In the
14th,
evening, 6 to 8 p.m.
6 to 8 p.m., the LSPA monthly membership meeting, and it will be held where?
At the Doubletree Inn in Westboro, at our
Westboro.
usual spot in Westboro.
The usual spot in
The usual
Westboro.
spot.
And Tom Cambieri from the Cape Cod Commission
Yep.
will be our featured speaker, and
Yep.
that is that he will be talking, I assume, about the Barnstable Public Water Supply,
Yes,
which
right.
has been affected, and there are a couple potential sources of these compounds to the water supply, the Fire Training Academy nearby, and the airport nearby, and he may also be speaking about some other JBCC, Joint Base Cape Cod, formerly known as MMR, that are not directly affecting that public water supply, but are in that area. So he may have, that's certainly a location, a quarter of our universe that has a lot of experience with these. I think it would be a very interesting presentation. Yes.
Paul,
What?
I was at the Soils Conference in the fall, sat through a couple courses on this, and one of the things that was enlightening to me was, especially when you talk about MCP sites and some of our field techs out in the world sampling, monitoring wells, is when you're looking at the part per trillion level, there's a lot of potential for background confusion. You know, you could, if you're wearing water repellent equipment or gear, you can actually come up with false positives. So I didn't know if your guidance addresses that specific situation.
Yes, one of the many issues with these compounds is the drinking water guideline that's out there is 0.70 micrograms per liter, so that's 70 parts per trillion, if I have my math correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And so you're talking very low levels. Added on to that is that you may have local, the equipment that you use, sampling, may in fact be sources of small amounts of these compounds, and small amounts can be important amounts. So the guidance does discuss that. One of the things we would love, additional comments for people that have more experience in the field doing this work is, how to beef that up. And we would love that we have read and stole as much as we can from other people. But we'd love to include any additional detail, any helpful recommendations that you can make that we can include in this.
I'm working on a site where, I'm working on a site where these compounds are among the compounds of concern. My Wikipedia level of understanding regarding the technical issues led me to conclude that the groundwater was the primary focus. At this particular site, folks are also apparently equally focused on soil issues, even though there are no obvious source areas like former firefighting stations and things of that sort. Any thoughts in that regard? And I think the only thought we've come up with so far is, having spoken with a risk assessor with whom we work often, he was able to run numbers that look like a standard method 2 or method 3 approach, but beyond that we were just wondering if you had any thoughts that might be relevant with respect to that.
So the question is whether whether DEP has any thoughts relevant to potential contamination in soil and how we're looking at that and dealing with that. Well, so far, I mean, the short answer is no. So far, most of the sites or situations, they're not necessarily 21 sites, but most of the situations we've been dealing with are water related. Our experience with non-water matrices has been less with soil, and actually we've been doing some work with septic sludge being used for composting material, and finding some measurable levels in that material. But not, we haven't seen much, and thus have not had a lot of direct experience with soil as the source of that. You said your risk assessor, could or has done kind of a method 2 calculation for this, and that's, as you read that, that's one of the things that we recommend. As you're looking at this, method 2 is an option for creating a method 2 standard. There's a health advisory which is cited in there, with the health advisory and then the toxicity values behind the health advisory that can be used to come up with numbers that way. So should you find it and should it be of concern in soil, there is an MCP risk assessment way of dealing with it. That has not been our focus yet, but if that's the source and you're finding measurable levels. Actually, we have had some experience. The one experience, the other experience that comes to mind, and maybe Tom Cambieri can speak about this at the membership meeting, you can ask him more in detail. At the Fire Training Academy, where they had been using the foams, there was some contaminated soil there that had been identified, had been addressed, and I believe has been removed and disposed of. And we were working with them, with the Fire Training Academy and landfills in the area to make sure that the material was appropriate to go to those landfills. So there is that process, and if you need any more information about that, I can get that.
So Paul, is DEP contemplating setting their own health advisory or drinking water standard at this point? Or?
The question is DEP contemplating setting their own health advisory or drinking water standard at this point? And I would draw the line, the language that you just used is more of a drinking water program language. So from the wayside cleanup perspective, I would rephrase your question.
GW1.
Is Massachusetts considering creating method 1 standards for these compounds in the near future? And the answer is yes. And until we do that, and that we assume would be part of the rate package that is barreling along the highway and will arrive shortly. But we would anticipate it would be part of that, yes.
Given the sources of this material, which are fairly, I would say ubiquitous, but particularly ubiquitous in things like furniture upholstery, carpet, fabric, wall covering, indoor, particularly residential materials, some reports from the public health people indicate that the environmental drinking water and soil, ambient air, these are all negligible in terms of exposure compared to the multiple orders of magnitude higher concentrations in house dust that are directly exposed to your human population. And as Kevin alluded, there are huge amounts of cross-contamination possibilities. We were even worrying about, do you drive the sample in your car, which is loaded with this? So the question is, I understand the department is constrained to work on the media that you have purview over, but in terms of actually protecting human health from these compounds, this doesn't look like it will have measurable impact.
I hope you all heard that. I'm not going to try to repeat it. But I think at its core, I mean that's a philosophical discussion that we've had, or that was really at the core of the whole wayside cleanup exposure universe. And while this is the new example of it, and with unique challenges, it's not substantially different from the issues that we deal with, say, 1,4-dioxane, just to back up one emerging contaminant ago, where it's in all sorts of products, the shampoos that you put on your head. So if you're drinking it from a landfill that's contaminating your water, should that be an issue? Well, our job and our role and our charge from the legislature in our law is to identify those releases to the environment, identify ones that pose a significant risk and address them. And to the extent that we can mitigate and limit and remove that material from at least the non-voluntary exposures that we deal with, then we do that. And it is a larger philosophical question, but that is what we do at its heart.
So my follow-up on that is, are you, in the many bureaus or the departments of the DEP, are your solid waste people looking at this because there's becoming increasing concern that all those old couches and carpet and stuff ending up in the landfills are in fact
well, I can say that that all of the DEP programs are looking at these chemicals at PFAS in a wide range of different ways. Our primary focus right now is dealing with public water supplies that contaminate, potential private well exposures and all of that. But I think on a global level, the attention that these compounds are getting it's pretty high right now and across the program. I can't speak though for the details of what other programs are doing or will do in the future.
Well, I think that that's, of course, a really important point. I think, though, that the evidence now shows, at least in some cases, where the water supply is contaminated, that contribution to overall exposure is more significant than the other pathways. And so I think that will bear out, but of course, when you get into the weeds and you're looking at much lower concentrations in drinking water, that may not be of issue. But I think in those places where that's happening, it is more substantial than the other indoor, even including food sources.
Okay, and with that, okay, I have to let Nancy. And then we're going to move on because we do want to try to keep close to this.
Okay, I just wanted to quickly go back to the soil question on EPA. Closer? Okay. On the soil question, EPA is anticipating that the states will use the toxicity information that's embedded in the health advisories to do calculations for direct contact, to estimate risk from direct contact from soil. So that's a fairly simple calculation, and states that have done that, people have done that already. The numbers end up to be relatively high in soil compared with the numbers that we expect will be of concern for leaching in areas where there's groundwater that needs to be protected. Those numbers are going to probably be quite low, what we have in these calculations.
Yeah, that's really the last, it's fairly easy to run the soil direct contact numbers. We've done that. The piece that we are working on now and that Rose will be working on is running the leaching model to see what the leaching groundwater protective levels will be. And it's kind of the last piece before we have the one standards. And so with that, again, comments by March 3rd to Rose Knox, and we'll talk about it again next time. So Liz will now talk about some CAMs.